Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Wednesday, the 11th of October. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 595 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition, and I will also have an update for you from Israel and Gaza. And then I will introduce our guest, and then together we will take a look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has attended the meeting of NATO defence ministers in Brussels, appearing before the media in a joint briefing with the NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg. Zelensky said he expected Russia to use winter as a weapon and again target Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and he asked for increased air defence. He appealed again for confiscated Russian assets to be released to pay for reconstruction in Ukraine. Stoltenberg said that NATO would continue to support Ukraine because your fight is our fight. He added that NATO had increased production of armaments. The US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said today that America would continue to support Ukraine for as long as it took, even amid the unfolding political chaos in Congress and despite the escalating violence in the Middle East. Russia's Foreign Intelligence Chief, Sergei Narishkin, has said the issue of support for Ukraine was becoming toxic in the US and that the divisions would deepen ahead of next year's presidential election. Repairing the damaged Baltic Connector pipeline between Finland and Estonia will take at least 5 months, and a restart of gas transport will at the earliest happen in April 2024. Jens Stoltenberg said today of the pipeline damage that if it is proven to be a deliberate attack on a NATO critical infrastructure, then this will of course be serious. But it will also be met by a united and determined response from NATO. Ukraine's security service said today that it had identified 2 suspected informers who allegedly helped Russia strike at a wake in Hroza in Kharkiv region, where more than 50 people were killed last week. The US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said that the G7-led price cap on Russian oil has sharply reduced Russian revenues over the past 10 months, and that it was critical to keep imposing severe and increasing costs on Russia over its war in Ukraine. Alexander Bogomats, the Bryansk regional governor, said Russia had shot down at least 3 Ukrainian drones over his region in the past few hours. The Dutch Defence Secretary, Kasia Ollongren, has said outside the NATO headquarters in Brussels that Sweden should be admitted into the alliance as swiftly as possible. Vladimir Putin is to visit Kyrgyzstan on Thursday in what would be the Russian leader's first known trip abroad since the International Criminal Court issued a warrant for his arrest. Yesterday, Rafael Grossi, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, said that President Zelensky had promised him that Ukraine would not attack Europe's biggest nuclear power plant as part of any counter-offensive against Russia. Russia has been defeated in its bid to return to the United Nations Human Rights Council after its suspension last year in a vote following the invasion of Ukraine. And Russian forces are closing in on the strategically important eastern Ukrainian town of Avdiivka, which has been hit by intense shelling since yesterday morning, according to officials. And now, from Israel and Gaza, Gaza's only power plant ran out of fuel this afternoon, forcing it to shut down after Israel cut off supplies, the Gazan Energy Ministry said. That leaves only generators to power the territory, but they also run on fuel that is in short supply. The death toll in Israel rose by 200 to 1,200 people. An IDF spokesperson said this rise was not because there is ongoing fighting. There have been reports of a massacre at the Kfar Aza kibbutz. Journalists were taken by the Israeli military to the kibbutz, an Israeli community on the frontier with Gaza, where people were killed when Hamas broke through the border on Saturday. Children were among the dead, according to the reports. The most recent update from the Gaza Health Authority has put the Palestinian death toll in the enclave at 1,055 since Saturday. Among the dead were 260 children and 230 women, it said. The number of wounded was said to be 5,184. At least 30 people have been killed and hundreds wounded as Israel pounded the Gaza Strip with hundreds of airstrikes overnight, a Hamas government official has said. More than 260,000 people have fled their homes in the Gaza Strip as heavy Israeli bombardments from the air, land and sea continue to hit the Palestinian enclave, according to the UN. 2 Palestinians were fatally shot in East Jerusalem by Israeli border police in a sign of increasing violence that disproportionately targets young people across the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The Palestinian envoy to the UN on Tuesday described Israel's bombardment of the Gaza Strip as nothing less than genocidal. Pope Francis called for the release of all hostages held by Hamas. He said he was very worried by the total siege imposed by Israel on Gaza. The Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, told soldiers, "We will come from the ground," in another clear sign that a ground offensive into Gaza is imminent. Israel's military aim is to destroy Hamas's military capabilities, a spokesperson has said. Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus said Israel's mission was to make sure that Hamas, at the end of the war, won't have any military capabilities by which they can threaten or kill Israeli civilians. The Israel Defense Forces said they had hit hundreds of targets in Gaza, including 80 in the neighborhood of Beit Hanon, a city in the northeast edge of Gaza, and more than 450 targets in the Al Furqan neighborhood. The targets included banks and places the IDF says were used by Hamas to direct attacks against Israel. And the US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has said that the US is discussing the idea of a route for safe passage for Gaza civilians with Israel and Egypt. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by Drew Hendry MP. Drew has been the SNP MP for Inverness, Badenoch and Strathspey since the 7th of May 2015. He became the MP by beating Danny Alexander, who'd been the MP for more than 10 years. Prior to becoming an MP, Drew served in the Highland Council since 2007, and he is now the SNP spokesperson at Westminster on the economy. Drew, good evening. How are you keeping?
Good evening. Good evening, Andrew. Good to join you.
And thank you for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland this evening, Drew. Firstly, what's your reaction to the news and the events that we're hearing described from Israel and from the Gaza Strip over the last 3 days?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important to say that these brutal and unjustifiable attacks from Hamas are completely and utterly unreasonable. They are horrendous, and we must utterly condemn what they've been doing in terms of the actions that they've taken, the hostage taking, the murder, the rape. It is absolutely, and I repeat, absolutely unjustifiable. But you can hold that view and also feel some sympathy and compassion, as the First Minister said, for the over 2 million people that are in Gaza just now who have absolutely no links to Hamas and are now suffering from some of the really horrendous conditions that you've described in your report there just now. And, you know, no child should have to suffer these conditions. No innocent civilian should have to be in that position. It really is time that the international communities, the community and the people involved, the countries involved, Israel and Palestine, got to a position where they can bring this to a halt. You know, the suffering is just too deep and too wide. And, you know, this is, as a result, yes, this action is as a result of these brutal and horrendous attacks by Hamas. They are, and I'll say it once more, they're completely unjustifiable and have to be utterly condemned from what they're doing. But we must make sure that we're doing what we can to stop this so that no more innocent people suffer in this conflict.
Thanks, Drew. We'll stay with coverage related to the events in Israel and Gaza for our first story this evening, because the UK Technology Secretary has followed the EU in demanding social media executives remove violent content related to the war from their platforms. Michelle Donnellan called the meeting after the EU criticised X, what we used to call Twitter, about discussion of the Israel-Hamas conflict on its platform, including fake news and the use of repurposed historical footage. Donnellan posted on X on Tuesday night that she wanted to ensure violent content was removed. I've called an urgent meeting with social media companies to ensure action is taken to swiftly remove any violent content fueled by Hamas's acts of terrorism in Israel from their platforms, she wrote. We are taking action to stand in solidarity with Israel and our Jewish community. It is understood that representatives of X, Google, TikTok, Meta, and Snapchat's parent companies have been invited to the meeting. The coverage on X has come under scrutiny amid evidence of disinformation, purposefully misleading posts related to the war on that platform. On Tuesday, Thierry Breton, the EU Commissioner responsible for the bloc's landmark Digital Services Act, which regulates social media companies, told X's owner Elon Musk that his platform was being used to disseminate illegal content and disinformation in the EU. Breton added, I therefore invite you to urgently ensure that your systems are effective and report on the crisis measures taken to my team. Musk replied on X asking Breton to list the violations you allude to on X so that the public can see them. Now, Drew, Media Matters, which is a US media watchdog, said that the attacks represented X's first test amid a global crisis and that it had failed spectacularly, with verified accounts among the sources spreading false information. Do you think, is the failure by X over the past few days, is it spectacular?
Yeah, I think social media companies in general are far too slow to react to the misinformation and disinformation that's put out there, and some of the insightful content that's put forward. It's absolutely correct that the UK government are now following the EU Commissioner Thierry Breton in challenging these social media companies, Meta and X or Twitter, as it used to be known, have just not risen to the norm, what should be expected as a normal challenge for them to deal with this kind of thing, particularly in such a high-profile international event, as we've seen unfold in Gaza and in Israel over the past few days. But of course, this has been an ongoing problem throughout the Ukraine invasion, the illegal invasion of Ukraine from Russia, and it continues to be an issue that they've just failed to grapple with. That you have to wonder, what it is that will make them do that. I know that there is a substantial fine available for these companies, which is about I believe it's around 6% of their turnover if they don't comply. Maybe it is about time we saw some of that muscle being exercised in order to make sure that the social media companies take it far more seriously.
Thanks, Drew. And you mentioned Thierry Breton there, and as I said, he's the European Commissioner responsible for enforcing the sweeping new EU laws governing social media. He wrote to Meta soon after issuing a warning to X on the same matter. He gave Mark Zuckerberg's social media platforms 24 hours to inform him of the steps that they were taking to comply with the Digital Services Act in the EU. But it was only today that Michelle Donnellan summoned representatives of these companies. Do you think, is this another example of the UK at the coup's tail, perhaps lagging behind again?
Well, it's a pretty common problem, but look, let's not be churlish about the fact that this is something that had to be done. Yes, obviously, like with everything else, we'd like the UK to be able to move far more quickly on things like this, but at the very least, they've followed the EU's intervention and are going ahead with it. To that end, obviously, we'd support the fact that that action is being demanded. It should be something that's happening across the world just now, and I very much hoping that at some point in the near future, preferably right away now, some of these warnings will be heeded. But otherwise, I think it will be up to governments to start to take action if they, completely fail, as they have done, to respond to what is a reasonable position to stop dis and misinformation being circulated deliberately.
Thanks, Drew. And just on the matter of X specifically, you mentioned that under the Digital Services Act in the EU, breach of that act can can bring a fine of up to 6% of revenues from the business, or it can bring a total blackout in the across the EU. Do you think a ban on X in the EU is actually just speeding up the downward spiral for X that we've been seeing for a while now?
Well, look, I'm never in favour of blackouts of things. I think if there are other ways of dealing with these things, they should be taken forward. There are, as you've underlined, 6% of revenue would be a substantial, hit in the pockets of X, which is, obviously had its financial issues as well. Before any blackout is considered, I think probably applying some of those fines in a meaningful way might be a place to go first. But let's hope that belatedly they're able to take heed of these warnings and actually take some action. It is about time that social media grew up and was able to be responsible for this. We're not talking about free speech here. We're talking about disinformation, which is a completely different thing. And we've already seen instances of deep fakes and so forth being circulated. It is an issue that has to be wrestled with very, very quickly before we have even more serious problems than we have at the moment.
Thanks, Drew. We'll move on now because the Scottish Government Rural Affairs Secretary, Mary Gudgeon, and the Trade Minister, Richard Lochhead, have written jointly to the UK Government to voice the Scottish Government's concern about the possibility of the UK Government negotiating a foundational trade partnership with the United States of America, as reported recently in the media. The letter clearly reiterates the Scottish Government's opposition to any derogation of food safety and animal welfare standards, and asks that Scottish ministers are fully involved and meaningfully engaged in the UK Government's activity in relation to trading arrangements with the United States. Mary Gudgeon commented, the interests of Scottish agriculture and other sectors must not be traded away in order to secure a quick deal with the US or any country. So, Drew, it struck me that this just the latest example of the Westminster approach to devolution. We learned earlier today from the COVID inquiry in London that Boris Johnson refused to work with the Scottish and Welsh governments during the pandemic because he said it is optically wrong in the first place for the UK Prime Minister to hold regular meetings with other devolved administration First Ministers, as though the UK was a kind of mini EU of four nations and we were meeting as a council in a federal structure. He said, that is not, in my view, how devolution is meant to work. So is the concern with regard to the discussions of the trade arrangements with the US, is it just another example of the dismissive approach that Westminster takes to the devolved administrations?
Well, yes, and I'll come back to that in just a second. But I think the view of how devolution is supposed to work at Westminster is very much about them chipping away at the powers and reducing the Scottish Parliament. The Scottish Parliament's been an absolute boon for people in Scotland. People in Scotland always, when there are polls carried out, value the Scottish Parliament, and yet there are constant attacks. We've seen Labour talking about beefing up the Scotland office to again bypass the Scottish Parliament. This is just another part of the drip, drip, drip effect to take away even devolution, let alone denying people their choice over Scotland's future in a referendum. So it is a problem. But when you come back to this trade deal, Mary is absolutely correct when she is concerned about food standards. I remember when I was covering trade at Westminster for the SNP group that we warned at the time that the Australia-New Zealand deal would mean food standards being lowered. We'd see hormone-injected beef coming into the UK and obviously ending up by default on Scottish shelves because the Internal Market Act has stripped Scotland of the ability to stop that happening. And we were told we were scaremongering. But we've seen Jacob Rees-Mogg in recent weeks talking about what a boon it will have to be for us to have that hormone-injected beef and how he looks forward to seeing it coming here. So the mask is completely slipped. This is a desperate rush. It's always a desperate rush by the UK government to do a deal, any deal at any cost. And we've seen our farmers, we've seen our food producers, we've seen people being let down on this. Some of the impacts of the Australia deal and New Zealand deal on farmers have been absolutely horrendous. When you look at what they're going to have to face in terms of that, produce flooding into the UK, and of course, as I say, by default, Scotland. And of course, we've got nothing back in return from it. And there is a great fear that that'll happen yet again with any deal that's done with the US. It'll just be a matter of give them what they want so that we can parade the deal before the next general election. The fact has to be faced that they don't care about the impact on Scotland's businesses, Scotland's consumers, or Scotland's farming and fishing community. They just care about getting a deal for headlines. And that's what my concern would be here. I would absolutely echo the concerns of the Scottish Government that once again, they're being cut out of the conversation. And once again, it'll be people in Scotland and businesses in Scotland that would lose out if history repeats itself, which I very much fear it will do in terms of the negotiations from this UK government with the US.
Thanks, Drew. And it struck me we were the correspondence today is mainly focused, I think, on inbound trade, the risks of the risks to food quality and animal welfare. I was also thinking about the outbound trade, and you were touching on it there, insofar as if there is to be a trade deal with the US, I would think that a significant part of that, at least in terms of value, will relate to whiskey, Scotch whiskey. And I was just wondering, do you think is there a risk to the distilling industry as well in Scotland in terms of a deal at any costs with the US, bearing in mind that whiskey's already been hammered this year with the latest rise in duty?
Well, look, trade deals are not bad things, and if if we're able to at some point in the future negotiate a sensible deal with the US that actually benefits both people in Scotland and people in the US, which is the way these things ought to work, then we could look back at that and say, well, that was a welcome thing to do. The trouble is that the track record from the UK government is not good in this. And when you talk about our major exports, which are, tend to be food and drink, but we've also got a lot of other things that we export, such as satellites and a range of other kind of tech goods and games and so forth into the world market. And the US is one of the biggest markets for Scotland, second only to the UK, and one of the biggest trades goods markets for us. So it is an important territory. But of course, our history shows that there's been scant attention paid to what we need in terms of our manufacturers, in terms of our companies in achieving these deals. The New Zealand deal, when you look at that, was particularly bad, and they were dancing about on the New Zealand end, where we got very, very little back from that, and that's the real worry. If we are able to increase our exports in a meaningful way and also make sure that we're protecting standards on incoming goods, then that's all well and fine. But the point here is that the Scottish Government should be involved in those discussions, because we are here and we know what the implications are for the range of businesses, be they whisky distilleries or be whether they are food manufacturers or anything else. And yet we're once again being cut out of the conversation. So the ability to protect those people in our market is being removed for people who frankly have shown a track record of just simply not caring.
Thank you, Drew. That's some great perspective. Thank you. Now we'll move on now, because Ajay Banga, the new president of the Washington-based World Bank, has said that reducing poverty and hitting global net zero goals are being hindered by the severe debt burdens on poor countries, amid growing concern that high interest rates could cause dozens of countries to default. Banga urged faster progress in providing debt relief, but said there was no magic wand that could be waved to make the problem go away at a press conference at the bank's annual meeting in Marrakesh. Indermit Gill, the World Bank's chief economist, said the last time the Federal Reserve had raised interest rates as aggressively as it had recently was more than 40 years ago, and the result was that 24 countries went bankrupt. Their comments come as the US Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, said she planned to meet the head of China's central bank, Pan Gongsheng, for talks that would include possible closer cooperation on debt. Relations between Washington and Beijing are frosty at the moment, but amid growing pressures on indebted countries as a result of the higher global interest rates, Yellen said more help was needed. China has become one of the world's leading creditor nations, and its support is needed if countries are going to receive the help through the Common Framework, a debt relief mechanism set up by the G20 group of leading developed and developing nations in 2020, but which has been criticised for slowness and offering little tangible help. A report from Debt Service Watch, a coalition of debt campaign groups, said the outlook for developing countries was worse than during the Latin American debt crisis of the 1980s and during the 2 rounds of multilateral debt relief in the late 90s and mid-2000s. Debt service was servicing debt was absorbing 54% of budget revenue and 40% of public spending in Africa, the report said. Spread across all continents, 35 countries were paying more than half of their revenue servicing their debts, and over 54 were paying over one-third. Debt payments are crowding out spending to confront social and environmental crises. Debt servicing is 50% higher than the combined spending in African countries on education, health, social protection, and climate. And according to the Debt Service Watch report, the 5 countries with the highest debt servicing costs as a share of revenue are Egypt at 196%, Sierra Leone at 169%, the Gambia 165%, Sao Tome and Principe 137%, and Malawi at 133%. 4 countries, Chad, Zambia, Ethiopia, and Ghana, have all applied for debt relief through the Common Framework. So, Drew, as I was saying, debt servicing is absorbing 54% of budget revenue and 40% of public spending in Africa. That's unsustainable, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not a new problem. The issue is that it's getting worse. This has been a problem for many decades. And I think it's well known that if you are starting from a point of extreme debt, it's the same if you're in a household as you are in a country or a set of countries in this case. You are starting from a position that makes it extraordinarily difficult for you to climb out of that position. And that leads to unrest and other things happening as well. It is absolutely vital that the big international players get together and seriously address the issue of this debt that's been, not even built up, but in many cases imposed on third world countries, because it stops them being in a position to become more secure, to become more stable. It increases the opportunity for conflict, and it holds us all back. It will stop us in all kinds of things that we at first don't look connected. But for example, in trying to get towards net zero, trying to make sure that we're making a difference on on global hunger and so forth. All of these things are being held back by the fact that these countries are saddled with debt that they simply can't afford. And when it reaches these kinds of epic proportions, it becomes a critical problem. Not that it hasn't been already, but it becomes even more critical. So I hope that the international community, that you mentioned China and the important role that China plays, I hope there will be sense seen in terms of trying to work some relief into the system to make sure that these communities, these people, because that's what we're talking about, people in their homes and and going about their daily lives and ultimately suffering because of the fact that they're kept in such poverty, that these people are given some relief from the international community and some repayment for the fact that many of these countries have actually been exploited for gains over decades and hundreds of years.
Thanks, June. I wanted to talk to you about the politics of this a little bit as well. Matthew Martin, who's the director of Development Finance International, said this is a silent crisis. Countries might not yet be defaulting, but millions, if not billions, of people are suffering every day. People are not prepared to do anything about it, but they will have to deal with it if they don't. there will be more migration and more instability. Do you think, have many right-wing governments in Europe worked that out yet? Or have they worked it out, and are they relying on making political capital from ever-increasing migration?
Well, I think this is the conundrum that faces us all. The right wing governments, which we have one here in the UK, are very keen to use immigration as a stick to to stoke a culture war against people who are moving, and we've seen the plight of people who are genuinely refugees from the way they've been stigmatized and you know and portrayed as a problem as opposed to human beings who are just seeking safe harbor. And of course, if we are in it also conversely in a position where we're perpetuating this debt and causing ultimately helping to cause additional migration, then that adds to the pressure on people trying to flee where they are in order to make sure that they've got the ability to live, to seek refuge elsewhere. So it perpetuates the problem. There needs to be a hard reset on looking at this issue of migration, not only about the looking at the positives of what we can get from people moving and the ability to gain talent and hardworking people and into our communities, but also into how to prevent the need for people to move. And of course, this massive debt that's being built up does risk the fact that we'll see increased migration, which again, if something isn't done, will be badly handled. And again, we'll see more pressure on services. It already costs far more than it should to deal with immigration, for example, in the UK because of the way they've approached this. So nobody is a winner in what they're doing at the moment, and nobody is a winner if we continue to pressurize countries with this kind of debt burden.
Thanks, Drew. We'll move on now because Sir Keir Starmer has been accused of U-turns and delays over Labour's flagship £28 billion green investment pledge, as reports suggest the Labour leader intends to make further cuts to the already diluted Green Prosperity Plan. Shadow Labour ministers are reported to be planning to reduce its expected scope by as much as £8 billion a year. The SNP's Energy Security and Net Zero spokesperson, Dave Duggan MP, warned that Westminster's complacency was holding Scotland back and coming at a heavy cost to Scotland's energy sector. Commenting, Dave Duggan MP said, "It doesn't get much more complacent than this from Labour on both their general election prospects and on the need for significant climate action. With Downing Street now in his sights, Keir Starmer is already rolling back on the promises he's made, with green spending just another casualty in Labour's breathtaking U-turn and broken pledge record. If this is the way they'll behave in opposition, how can anyone trust them to act in the best interests of the planet when in government? Climate complacency and setbacks from the Westminster parties have come at a heavy cost to Scotland's energy sector, holding us back from becoming a green global leader. And Westminster's cutbacks, delays and refusal to match the Scottish Government's £500 million just transition investment continues to hinder Scotland's efforts to halt and reverse climate catastrophe." So, Drew, until June, Labour had portrayed the £28 billion number as additional expenditure. But now one shadow minister has said that Labour would also increasingly emphasise the phrase up to £28 billion, further weakening the target. So can anything which the Labour Party says be taken at face value now?
Well, clearly not, because all of these pledges have just been, turned on their head. They are willing to do what it takes to get into number 10. They've set their sights, as Dave Duggan has quite rightly pointed out. They've become absolutely complacent about the fact that they're going into number 10. And they've decided now that they don't have to uphold some of these promises. In fact, nearly all of the promises that they've made in the past, and really delivering more Tory cuts in a kind of weekly disguised version of them. It seems to be the way ahead for them. This This week we've seen the Labour Party conference. We've seen nothing from them on the really important issues for people, which is the issues around the cost of living, people's mortgages, their rents, their food bills, and very, very soon, if not already, their energy bills are rocketing for them just now. It is absolutely unaffordable for many, and it's about to become even more punishing. And yet we've seen nothing. We've seen no, proposals put forward to help with people. And this is the week, don't forget, when we've seen the International Monetary Fund come out and point out that the UK is not going to see a big difference to its inflation prospects over the next 5 years, regardless of who's in government at Westminster. We're not going to, as the UK, we're going to see the lowest growth, I think 0.6%, in of any of the kind of developed countries, any of the major nations that are going that are being compared on that just now. So we're going to see all of these problems continue, and yet nothing from Labour. So this U-turn is just yet another letdown on the way. They seem to feel that they're completely bulletproof as far as this election is concerned, and they are just going to U-turn as they've continued to U-turn on things. The report of the £8 billion cut to their planned investment is just yet another delay, another issue on top of the delay that they've already announced on this. So, so we can't realistically expect them to deliver anything that they're promising.
Thanks, Drew. Now to Sweden, because Stockholm has announced plans to become the first big capital city to ban petrol and diesel cars from its centre in an effort to slash pollution and reduce noise. From 2025, 20 blocks of Stockholm's inner city area spanning the finance and shopping districts will be restricted to electric vehicle traffic only. A decision on whether to expand the zone will be made in early 2025. Announcing the plan, Lars Stromgren, the city's vice mayor for transport, said, "Nowadays, the air in Stockholm causes babies to have lung conditions and the elderly to die prematurely. We need to eliminate the harmful exhaust gases from petrol and diesel cars. That is why we're introducing the most ambitious low-emission zone to date." A number of cities have introduced or are introducing schemes to try to tackle air pollution, but Stockholm's goes further than most. Paris, Athens and Madrid have only banned diesel cars, and London has a charging scheme that covers the most polluting combustion engines. Glasgow is the first city in Scotland to enforce a low-emission zone, with Edinburgh, Aberdeen and Dundee following behind. Stockholm's model is more far-reaching, with petrol and diesel cars are completely prohibited, although there are caveats. While it is primarily intended to allow only fully electric cars, bigger vans with plug-in hybrid engines will also be allowed, and exceptions will be made for ambulances and police cars, as well as cars in which the driver or a passenger has a documented disability. Stockholm's municipal government hopes the low-emission zone will bolster the take-up of electric vehicles. So, Drew, firstly, Lars Stromgren said the air in Stockholm causes babies to have lung conditions and the elderly to die prematurely. We need to eliminate the harmful gases from petrol and diesel cars. Do you think there's much chance that we'll be hearing the same kind of things from any deputy mayor in the UK anytime soon?
Well, I don't think so, because it's, again, this whole issue of transport has been stoked into something that it shouldn't be. We've got a need to get to net zero. We've got a need to reduce emissions. We've got a need to look at healthier outcomes for people. And obviously, I don't have an insight into what's happening in Stockholm, so I couldn't comment on what their position is in terms of air pollution. But they've clearly decided, as an independent country, to that they can do these things. The Swedes and Norwegians are way ahead of the UK in terms of the adoption of lower emission vehicles, because they've put the right kinds of incentives in place for people to take these up. We know that there's a lot of research going into how to improve transport but lower emissions at the same time. There too. So, what we should be doing is looking to the future, looking to what we can do to, as I say, to accelerate our move towards net zero. We should be sticking to the plan, not doing what Rishi Sunak has done, and basically not only putting those targets back and perhaps risking our progress there, but also saying to the industry who'd been gearing up for these changes that he was just changing tack again. That's not good for investment. It's not good for business, and it's certainly not a good signal in terms of governance, because basically, there is just no certainty for industry about what they're doing from the UK. So, in Sweden, as I say, they'll be looking at their own local needs. But certainly the ability to take bold decisions, the ability to take the decisions that are right for their communities and their countries is something that we should have here in Scotland. And we should have those powers of an independent country in order to make the kinds of decisions that we need to make, so that we can say, right, well, what are our needs? Do we need low emission zones? Do we need to have, different types of options for us, and then to plan ahead for those, and to make those a reality for our people?
Thanks, Drew. Now we'll go to Washington now, and to caveat the story, I can see that CNN are reporting that Steve Scalise has won the Republican nomination to be the next Speaker of the House of Congress. And so this is a story that's developing as we are on air just now. But House Republicans have been divided over who should be the next Speaker, but they did press ahead with the internal vote anyway to determine who can garner enough support to replace Kevin McCarthy, who was ousted from the post in a historic defeat last week. Two House Republicans, the Majority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana and the Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan of Ohio, both launched formal campaigns for the speakership, and each have received dozens of endorsements from fellow conference members. After they presented their visions for the role to the caucus in a candidate forum last night, it was unclear whether either man could secure the support of a majority of the House, given Republicans' razor-thin majority. If all 433 current House members participate in the vote, Scalise can only afford 4 defections within the Republican conference and still win the speakership. Some members had suggested they would prefer an alternative, or McCarthy, but McCarthy said he has asked the caucus not to put him back forward for the job. The Republicans' tenuous grasp on power was on full display last week when McCarthy became the first House Speaker in US history to be ejected from office. 8 Republicans, led by the hard-right Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, joined with House Democrats to remove McCarthy as Speaker. Many Republicans remain outraged at Gaetz and his allies over McCarthy's removal, but they have to try to unite around the one Speaker candidate who they now selected. Until a new leader is chosen, the Republicans' Congressman Patrick McHenry of North Carolina will continue to serve as the acting Speaker, but the House is unable to conduct any other business. No chamber-wide vote on the speakership has yet been scheduled, but the Republicans are hoping to have a vote in the House later today. Republicans are hoping they can choose a speaker by the end of next week and avoid the spectacle that unfolded in January. I'm sorry, there won't be a vote in the House today. Republicans are hoping that they can choose a speaker soon and avoid the spectacle that unfolded in January when McCarthy required 15 rounds of voting to win the gavel. Democrats are expected again to unanimously support their leader, Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Jeffries has called on the more centrist members of the House Republican Conference to join with Democrats in forming a bipartisan governing coalition, but no such partnership has materialized. So, Drew, as I said, Republicans' tenuous grasp on power was on full display last week when McCarthy was ejected from office. Would it be fair to say that it's maybe the case that at least among some Republicans, there's a tenuous grasp on reality?
Well, it certainly is an unprecedented situation that they've got there, and seems to be a product of what's happened in US politics, indeed in global politics over the past number of years, particularly around the Trump era and post-Trump era, that it's very, very difficult for Congress, and I suppose it would be the same at the Senate, to actually get work done. But the problems for the Republicans are, writ large. They've got a lot of issues around their presidential uh, nominations, about what's going to happen to Trump, and I think that's in the background of everything that's happening in Congress just now. But the real losers are people who are trying to get through their daily lives in America, because Congress is quite a powerful body in terms of whether it is able to release funds and make sure that policies are able to be carried out across the US. So it's quite a difficult time, and we've also seen, in past weeks, deals that have had to be put together, which mean that funding for Ukraine, for example, has been held up. So I suppose that American politics is American politics. We must hope that they can get things sorted out for the benefit of others just now. But the woes of the Republican Party, I think, are going to continue for a while anyway.
Thanks, Drew. We'll come back to Scotland now for our next story, because following hillside inspections this morning, the A83 between Tarbert and Inveraray reopened to all traffic from 3 o'clock this afternoon. The section of the A83 had been closed since Saturday to allow the clear-up of the material from the extensive landslip from the route at Glenkinglas, and to a lesser extent at the Rest and Be Thankful, where a small landslip also occurred. Heavy and persistent rainfall on Friday and Saturday, which was associated with an amber weather warning, caused major impacts on the trunk and local road networks, with significant disruption across Argyll. The area around the A83 saw a month's worth of rainfall, it's about 16 centimetres, over 36 hours. 7 landslides have reached the road, with the A83 A815 junction at the west end of Glenkinglas badly affected. One small landslide at the Rest and Be Thankful, where debris reached the road but has now been cleared. There were 2 further landslides on the Rest and Be Thankful, where the debris was captured in the debris nets and the pit. 4 landslides at Glenkinglas. Debris reached the road and the road has now been cleared. 2 small landslides at Glenkinglas, which were captured in the debris bund, and 2 very substantial landslides on the A83 at the Dunoon junction with the A815. The debris which reached the road there has now also been cleared. As part of the operations undertaken, Bear Scotland, which is the contractor responsible for trunk roads in the north and west of Scotland, removed over 12,000 tonnes of debris and cleared roadside verges and drainage systems to allow the trunk road to reopen to traffic. Ian Stewart, Bear Scotland's North West representative, said, "Our teams have worked tirelessly in challenging conditions to reopen the A83 to all traffic. We are very grateful to our colleagues and partners, as well as local residents, for all your support and patience during this challenging time." The Argyll and Bute Council have said that the B828 will remain closed presently due to flood damage on the road. So, Drew, firstly, a mother and daughter say they're lucky to be alive after escaping from their car moments before it was swept away in one of the landslides. Fiona and Ciara Smith, who are from Campbellton, were travelling on the A83 on Saturday when their car became stuck on rubble, and they were rescued by some pretty brave police officers. Is it fair to say that until the land around the A83 is properly stabilised and more infrastructure is built, the risk remains that somebody's going to be killed?
Well, as I understand it, a lot of these landslips are not in the areas where there usually is landslips. For example, the Rest and Be Thankful is an area where we usually hear of the serious issues. And obviously, the Scottish Government have announced a plan for, I believe it's a £470 million covered section for that, in order to protect it in future. But the rainfall that we've had over the past few days has been, I believe it's been absolutely unprecedented in terms of the effect that it's had. As I've said, these landslips have happened again, as I understand, in some areas that don't normally suffer from landslips. So it is an ongoing issue with climate change that we need to make sure we're addressing. I'm sure that engineers will be looking at parts of that road to see if further work needs to be carried forward. But I think the biggest issue that, or the biggest thing that we should be saying, is that there's been some fantastic work carried out by Bear Scotland staff. We've all seen the horrendous conditions that they would have had to work in order to make this road, clear again and able to be used. And I think the men and women that have put their efforts into doing this have been absolutely fantastic. Going forward, it's going to be really important to look at how we make sure that we, are doing our best to protect lives on that road. What can be done, what can be anticipated, what changes need to be made. But I think the investment that's going to be made in the covered tunnel will make sure that there's a greater deal of certainty and assurance about the vast majority of that road, in terms of some of the more regular issues that we've seen over the past number of years.
Thanks, Drew. Now, our final item this evening is that applications have opened for a new pilot fund to support initiatives that promote Scotland's international connections. The Scottish Connections Fund is open to bids from individuals and organisations in Scotland's international diaspora, and a total of £15,000 has been allocated for this year's pilot, which will inform the development of an expanded fund next year. The fund follows a commitment in the government's Scottish Connections framework, which seeks to expand links and networks with Scottish people living elsewhere in the world, those with Scottish heritage, alumni of Scotland's educational institutions, and people with professional, business, cultural, or other links to Scotland. The External Affairs Secretary, Angus Robertson, said, "The Scottish Government has long believed that better engaging our diaspora, family and friends of Scotland globally, can not only benefit Scotland economically and enrich our culture, but also improve Scotland's connections and reputation. We know that millions around the world cherish their connections with Scotland, and we are grateful for the work of people and organisations who do so much to strengthen these links, whether that is through the promotion of our culture and heritage, or Scotland's reputation as a place to live, work, visit, study, and do business." He went on, "This fund aims to support their work to create more vibrant, visible, and connected global Scottish diaspora, and I encourage anyone with an interest to submit an application by the 8th of November 2023. So, Drew, we talk from time to time about the diaspora and for the Scottish diaspora and also other diaspora around the world. So how important do you think is the diaspora of Scots in comparison to, say, the Irish diaspora or the Indian diaspora?
Well, I think it's really important. You talked about India and Ireland just now, who've really made a lot of the fact that they can not only enhance the image, as Angus Robertson said, of the country, and the brand and the emotional ties with their countries, but they've turned it into a real economic gain. And when you look at the way Scotland outperforms the rest of the UK in terms of inward investment, then it's really important that we continue to make sure that we're reaching out to our diaspora. A lot of the people that are interested in Scotland aren't Scots, but some of them will be of Scots or of Scots descent as well, and they will have friends and families who are interested in our country too. So anything that we do to reach out increases the visibility, means that we are more likely to not only gain additional tourism, gain the economic benefits indirectly, gain more inward investment, but we're also, very, very likely to make sure that we've got a bit more influence in terms of, being some of the Scottish values that we like to portray, about being welcoming, about the fact that we are a country that seeks to be progressive. All of those things are important issues, and this is a small investment, but a very important investment in enhancing all of those things. So I think it's a very good thing to take forward. We've got an awful long way when you look at the leverage that Ireland has been able to make in the world stage. We've got an awful long way to go, but arguably we have a lot more potential at our disposal. And I think it's as I say, I think it's a very, very good thing that we seek to do the most we can with that, to create as much interest as we can in Scotland, to for the benefit of our businesses, for the benefit of our people, and indeed for the benefit of our international connections.
Thanks, Drew. I'm afraid that's all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland depends on the generosity of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to develop the station, and to make new programmes for you. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our need to reach our £30,000 target to pay our bills is still pressing. However, the generosity of our supporters has given us a little more time. We've now raised £18,800 and we are able to continue making programmes for the next few weeks, but our need to raise the remaining £11,200 is still really urgent. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on X and on Blue Sky at Broadcast Scot. Please like and retweet us there, and you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. We will be back at 7 p.m. sharp tomorrow evening for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please come back and join us then. I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching this evening, and of course I'd like to give a very special thanks to our very special guest, the MP for Inverness, Badenoch and Strathspey, Drew Hendry. Thanks, Drew.
Thank you very much.
Please look after yourselves and please have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.